Hey guys, sorry I haven't made a video in a while. Took me a while to get ready. It takes a lot of money to look this cheap. This video and my makeup look are both dedicated to the dead spider I found underneath the couch that I'm sitting on. Very slay. Today we're talking about Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon. And to everyone who watched my Bayonetta 3 video and told me that dancing in Bayonetta didn't matter, I anxiously await your apologies in the comments. Obviously, spoilers ahead, you've been warned. Bayonetta Origins is an action-adventure RPG that follows a 15-year-old Cereza, who is Bayonetta, for those of you who aren't in the know. That's her, her legal name, her government name. Bayonetta's her drag name. Cereza is half Umbran Witch and half Lumen Sage. The Lumen Sage part doesn't really matter. For all intents and purposes, she is a magical girl. She's a witch. The main power of Umbran Witches is to be able to summon demons. At this point in Cereza's journey, that's not an ability that she's acquired. So she's an outcast because her mom and dad did a Romeo and Juliet, because two houses, both alike in dignity. Like, Umbran Witches and Lumen Sages are sworn enemies, so even though one is a race of women and the other is a race of men, they are not to copulate, I guess. She's being trained outside of the witch village, witch town. I don't know what it's called. I don't think it has a name in the series. She's being trained on the outskirts of town by another outcast witch named Morgana, who runs this foster home for girls who are misbehaving or acting out, especially girls who, like Cereza, are being punished just for being alive. Morgana lives on the outskirts of town, which is next to Avalon Forest, which is the home of the fairies, which are the new villain type that are introduced in this game. Cereza wants to become stronger to save her mother, and one night she has a dream after failing a training session where Lucaon. Okay, I just have to accept that it's going to sound bad. Lucaon appears and he tells her that coming to the forest and saving him will bring her power. Cereza is a witch flop. Like I said, she can't summon demons, but otherwise she's not doing well. She doesn't have a lot of power. She can't do any of the fun witch stuff. She can perform basic magic like growing plants via ballet turns, but that's it. She can grow plants, that's her power in the game. Cereza can't fight, and she's entered this labyrinthine fairy forest, which, by the way, the map design in this game is flawless. It's so confusing, but everything in the map is connected, and it's designed to make Cereza confused, but also deliberately to make the player confused. Anyways, she has to follow this white wolf around the forest. She gets attacked by fairies, and she attempts another demon summon, which is only partially successful, and a baby demon possesses Cereza's stuffed cat. The demon doesn't have a name, it doesn't want to be named, so Cereza is I'm calling you Cheshire, because that's her cat's name. They go on this adventure through the forest where they gain some powers of their own and also some elemental powers along the way through absorbing these 4 cores throughout the forest. Very Final Fantasy crystals energy. That's the setup. They basically have to get these orbs to dissolve this prison structure that's keeping Lucaon captive. Okay, I think I kind of got it right that time. So that's the premise. The game, overall, a shock to none. I just have to say it. Another banger from Platinum Games. It's really good. I'm going to tear into it a little bit later because there's some things that I just don't think work. But overall, very clean, well-executed product. The gameplay is great. The story is well-paced. It genuinely feels like you start off as a very weak person. Even just the way that Cereza can't really run exemplifies that. It can get a little slow and a little bloated in some spots, but I feel like it keeps it moving fast enough. And if you're not exploring every area and you're just focusing on main objectives, I don't think you'll run into this issue at all. Probably your gameplay experience will be very fast. I think that combat is surprisingly robust too, especially considering you only have 2 real attack buttons. Cheshire has his basic mode and then he has his 4 elemental modes, and each of those has a different magical power that he can use. His basic mode can counter. When he's in the water form, he can basically use water gun. Otherwise, it's just normal attacking. Depending on which core you have active, his attack pattern is different, and you can kind of combo using Cereza's binding magic. It's just all really cool. Honestly, I thought the gameplay was going to be way more boring than it was. Granted, it is limited, but as you progress, you genuinely get more options. I just thought it was really good. The game itself is so beautiful. So stunning. The kind of watercolor storybook aesthetic really worked with the kind of story that they were trying to tell. One thing I didn't love is that the cutscenes themselves aren't automatically set to like auto continue. You can do that, but I didn't figure it out probably for a couple hours of being in the game. I think you hold Y and the pages and cutscenes will turn themselves. That definitely made the scene work feel a lot less clunky. But if you're just hitting A yourself, it's not it. I would strongly suggest turning on auto advance. The fairies also use this kind of like stained glass butterfly look with their wings. I think that itself is very gorgeous. However, I do wish more of that stained glass look was incorporated into the fairy designs. It feels like most of them are missing that. And even the king and like Lucaon don't really have much of that going on. I was just expecting it a little bit more because Bayonetta 3 and its depiction of fairies, we got a lot more of that specific aesthetic. Here, the stained glass wasn't really playing much of a role in the look. The game runs really well. You obviously have to talk about this because it's a Switch title. There weren't really any frame rate drops. The only time I noticed anything like that was in the final fight with the White Wolf. Otherwise, it was good. And the actual final boss fight, nothing. It ran very smoothly. I love that there's a forced helplessness with Cereza. Like, Cereza's constantly afraid. She's a huge coward. She can't really run. Summoning Cheshire was basically an accident. All of her magic is non-violent too, which is consistent with how her future self really relies on the use of weapons and hand-to-hand combat. Like, most of the witch magic is support magic, and that's not something I've ever really thought about. Let's get into the story. There are only 4 characters who are actually important. Obviously, Cereza, main character, baby witch. This is her coming-of-age origin story. Cheshire is a demon from Inferno. He initially is reluctant to help Cereza, but they have like a kind of magical bond link that forces them to be in proximity of each other. If he leaves, he dies. Cheshire's main goal is to just figure out how to get home. He wants to go back to hell. It's where he belongs, and that's where I am. It's hot in here. So those are our 2 main characters. The bad guy, for the most part, is just the monolith of fairies. And then we have Lucaon, who's this child who we're trying to save. And then Morgana, who is Cereza's mentor and kind of plays a surrogate mother role. It's not like that deep, but you can tell that they have a fondness towards one another, even though Morgana is quite strict. Jeanne, Bayonetta's bestie, is here. She doesn't really do much, but we'll get to her. Rosa is the driving force. That's Bayonetta's mother. She might as well not be in this game at all. So we run around the forest, we gather up all these magical cores, we're rescuing wisps from the fairies. The wisps in this game are literal wisps, except they're not little fires. They're like very adorable little ghosts, like very good for a plush. So we're following this white wolf, all with the intention of releasing Lucaon from his prison. There's some tension between Cereza and Cheshire along their journey. They have a few scuffles, some of which worked and some of which felt really contrived. It happens more than once in the game where they get into an argument and then they're like, fine, I'm going to go my own separate way. But like, obviously the proximity rule to the magic is in place. So that has to get resolved. The first time the game did it, it worked because they got into a minor tiff and then they just talked about it like normal. And then they were like, yeah, we're going to have to learn how to get along to really make this work because, you know, Cheshire doesn't want to die and Cereza can't do anything. So she needs this big beast to get through the forest. Also, I wasn't really upset when the 2 of them had arguments. I didn't really interpret them as friends. When they argue, I'm not upset. I'm like, okay, they're gonna have to figure that out like right away. And if they don't, who cares? Like, the stakes in this relationship are really transactional about what they can do for each other. Like, it's not emotional. So the second time that they get separated is again because of a fight, because Cereza, her abilities are still largely the same. Her main power is that she can grow plants. So when it comes to fighting enemies, she can bind them in these thorny kind of vines. So her thorn ability gets stronger, but not to the point where she can do damage. It just means that she can bind stronger enemies. They fight a Jabberwock, which was a great inclusion because that's not a real mythological creature. That is made up by Lewis Carroll, I think is the name of the Alice in Wonderland author. It's this like armored kind of ugly How to Train Your Dragon, and initially Cheshire can't damage it, and then Cereza gets these super powered vines that normally she struggles to bind bigger enemies, but then she gets this like souped up version of the ability. I don't know, pierces the armor, let's say. It just does the job. So Cheshire kind of has a chip on his shoulder because he needed Cereza's help. So they separate again, and this is at like the fairy castle. We're at like the late game. They're on their way to get the fire core, which is the last one. And while they're separated and like angry with each other, Cheshire gets captured, and Obviously, Cereza ends up going to rescue him because she doesn't like seeing Cheshire get brutalized and tortured, because the fairies are trying to get him to give up Cereza's location so that they can capture and kill her, and they promise him a portal back to hell. And Cheshire is like, no. And then Cereza rescues him. You know, we're probably about 75% of the way through the story, but this is where there's an actual commitment to each other with these two. Like, the moment really works, but I wish the setup, instead of being like they're pissed at each other, like, Cheshire just should have been captured by a shit ton of fairy enemies, and then Cereza is tasked with having to go rescue him, and the fact that she does it when she doesn't really have to is that show of friendship. That really would have worked for me. That's how I would have edited that moment. I think the rest of what they do to support Cereza and Cheshire having a relationship, especially like a relationship going beyond the end of the story, I think all of that works really well. Like, there's a part towards the conclusion where Cheshire enters like a berserk rage mode, and he almost kills Cereza, but he's able to hold himself back. That's one of the best moments in the game, because you can't fight him, and she's able to use her magic to kind of soften him. And then they're able to use the Berserk Cheshire mode in the final fights. It's delicious. It's delicious. This game is really good. So we learned that there was like a fairy hostile takeover, and the previous king was killed because the fairy people, were not happy that he married a human woman, and they had a mixed baby. Very Bayonetta. I also thought it was interesting that most of the fairies were like vaguely humanoid at best. Most of them looked like bugs. But the king, who, granted, we only see kind of the chest profile, we don't see his face, but he had very like Wanu proportions, like skinny waist, wide shoulders. Anyways, they killed him. The old king is dead, and the new king is the one who's causing us trouble. But we take care of that, we kill him, and we discover, much to no one's surprise, that Lucaon is the fairy prince. He's, you know, the two houses both alike in dignity baby of the fairies and the humans. So he's the true heir to the throne. So part of the reason why he's been locked up is because the current fake king, I guess, the current usurper, doesn't want him to take his rightful place. Once we get all of the cores and we make it to Lucaon, he expects Cereza to sacrifice Cheshire, because part of this like releasing ritual demands a sacrifice. This is very late in the game. This is after they've had their whole emotional berserk kind of pick me girl, like, I'm the only one who can talk to him when he's mad. Look at me, you're not you. So Cereza's like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not just gonna give him over to you. So Lucaon seems kind of regretful, and he's like, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to kill one of you because I want to be a human again. Because the white wolf that we've been following is Lucaon's soul. Like, where we arrive, this like crystalline prison, it's just his body. So the wolf is like, I'm gonna have to fight you. This fight was so good. Like, it was pretty simple. It wasn't that hard. But there's this slide segment that is so scary. Like, the tension was so great because I was really holding on. I was at the edge of my seat. And it's literally just Temple Run. Like, that's the game. But I was in it at this point. So we resolve this fight. Lucaon is down, but he's not out. And then all these fairies are trying to run us out of the forest, and Cereza saves Lucaon and like runs away on Cheshire, and they make it to the edge of the forest. I don't think the fairies can leave the forest. Something happens, we defeat them. I don't know. They can't chase us out of the forest. We make it to the edge, and we're back at Morgana's house. And then we get the reveal of the century. Like, I knew Lucaon was going to be the fairy prince. That was obvious as hell. But what wasn't obvious to me was that Morgana is Lucaon's mother. They really got me. I was shocked, surprised, upset. I cried at the end of this game. She's been orchestrating this whole thing. Like, the dream that Bayonetta had at the beginning where she was like, I have to go get power, that was Morgana magic. The dead witches whose like journal entries we've found, and throughout the game, there are other crystal graves with witches in them, and you can tell that they're witches because if we look at Jeanne's design, Jeanne has this like feathered kind of ballet skirt, and you can see in the silhouette of these crystals that all of these souls that we're finding in these crystal structures that we're setting free for an upgrade resource, you can tell that they're witches too. Morgana reveals that this has been like an ongoing plot to save her son. She's been knowingly sending these witches into the forest when they're not strong enough in hopes that they will summon a demon and use that demon as a sacrifice once they get to the end. Cereza was the successful execution of the plan, but she became buddies with her demon, which like isn't supposed to happen. That's not a very witch thing to do. So Cereza fumbles the bag at the end, and there's a couple times throughout the game where there are these moonlit altars, and Morgana just like appears at them. She astral projects, whatever. And she talks to us. And the first time we see her at one of these, Cereza's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I know I disobeyed the rules, yada, yada, yada. And Morgana's like, it's okay. All I care about is that you make it out of the forest alive. You're in it now, so you have to live. You have to keep going. And I thought that that was a show of good faith from like someone who's usually quite stern and really into the rules. But no, it was a plot the whole time. She was feigning kindness so that we would save her kid. And I don't know, Morgana is like really rude at the end. She goes kind of crazy. And I don't know if this moment was bad or if it just made me upset. I can't really discern because I was unhappy. It just sucks. Like, she lashed out in a way that really broke my heart. It heavily contrasts the way that Lucaon felt about Cereza not offering a sacrifice, because he was like, I don't want to, but this is something I have to do. Like, I want to be alive again. Whereas Morgana starts to act a little bit crazy. I don't know. I guess it's supposed to be like a major depiction of like a mother's love and her trying to get him back. Just like totally delusional about how many witches she sent to die. And then she like lashes out at Cereza because not sacrificing her demon isn't very witch core. It just made me so sad. Like, in the first hour of the game, we see Cereza make Morgana this bracelet while the narrator is like talking about how she has a cold demeanor, but like the storybook kind of visual shows Morgana like wearing the bracelet with her back turned away from whatever's going on in the foreground. And it's just like a really nice use of like visual storytelling to demonstrate that even though she has this cold, stoic disposition, there is a tenderness and that she does care for Cereza. I know adults are nuanced and they can be portrayed as both loving and shitty, but it made me sad. Anyways, we have this like gorgeous final fight with Morgana. She brings us to this like pocket dimension and we fight a spider demon that looks exactly the same as the spider demon from Bayonetta 3. During the fight, we also unlock Witch Time, which is basically this ability that mechanically in game, if you dodge something with the right timing, time slows down and you can move really fast. We unlock Witch Time in this fight, and it's heavily implied that Witch Time is like an ancient art that not a lot of witches have access to, kind of emphasizing Bayonetta's Chosen One vibe. Also, at the beginning of the game, Morgana gives Cereza a brace that she can use to better harness her magical energy, and when she unlocks Witch Time, the brace disintegrates, which is also just a symbolic moment of like, I don't need your help anymore. I have achieved power. I'm fulfilling the hero's journey that I set out on. So we kill the spider demon, and then Morgana fuses with the spider demon. Her fusion looks exactly like when Bayonetta fuses with her spider demon in Bayonetta 3. This is by far the hardest fight in the game, and there's a secret boss fight that the internet told me was really, really hard. I had no problem with that. This was the fight that was hard. Also, the joystick on my left Joy-Con is broken, so I can't push it to use L3, and that's the button that lets Cereza dodge. So I didn't have access to the dodge command, which is just like a fun added layer of challenge. Anyways, this fight was great. We kill her, and the whole situation is just so tragic because the killing of Morgana like satisfies Bayonetta's quest for power. When witches die, they don't just die. Demons pull them into hell, which opens a portal to Inferno, which is what Cheshire needed the whole time. So he goes home. He and Bayonetta part ways here. And Lucaon needed a sacrifice. And because Morgana died, he gets reunited with his body. And now that his body and soul have been reunited, he affirms his friendship with Bayonetta, underlying friendship at everyone who is trying to convince me that Luca and Bayonetta should be a thing. I'm still in disagreement with that. A lot of people also think that just because I think Bayonetta and Luca shouldn't be a thing, that I think Bayonetta and Jeanne should be a thing, and I do not think that either. I think Bayonetta should end up with no one. Bayonetta is Bayonetta sexual. She loves herself more than anybody else. That's her empowerment. And I think choosing love kind of deflates that for me. I don't like it. I'm not into that interpretation at all. And I also think that Luca and Bayonetta being largely platonic in every depiction except for the very end of Bayonetta 3 is enough for me to be like, no, not happening. Dissatisfied. I just got so worked up. Anyways, the game ends with Bayonetta alone, and she gets all of her belongings from Morgana's house. She ties her hair up in a ponytail a la Bayonetta 1, and she continues her quest for power. That's the game. It's really good. This is an ad. It's not a paid ad, but it's an ad. I'm about to get into why this game doesn't work, but I obviously hold it in really high regard. So my primary issue with this game has to do with framing. It's a very good game, and the narrative works, but I'm not sure that this game should be about Cereza. In the mainline series, and I know that the titles are doing like a multiverse thing, storytelling. I know that like every Bayonetta is technically different, which we'll get into that, but in the mainline game, Bayonetta is over 500 years old. So while this is a great coming of age story, it's a great hero's journey, it's hard to see how this 15-year-old becomes the Bayonetta that we know, just thinking about this narrative in a grander context. It doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Also, I think that we get the important pieces of Bayonetta's origins between 1 and 2. The first one is literally about Bayonetta, who has amnesia, and Bayonetta is a chosen name, and like a third of the game is spent protecting a child version of herself who was brought to the future, specifically so that she would remember who she is. And then Bayonetta 2 has a whole segment where you go back in time, you reconnect with Rosa. We don't need an origin story for this person. We desperately need it for someone else. Let me cook. This game didn't have to be attached to the Bayonetta IP at all. I think narratively, in a grand sense, it doesn't serve the franchise all too much. However, if we are going to give someone an origin story, I think there are 2 great candidates for that. And the one that I think this game should have been about is Viola, because we don't know her. Jeanne could have had a backstory game. I think they should give her a game of her own eventually. Like, what's the issue, Platinum? Let Jeanne speak. But Viola is a new and incredibly underdeveloped character from Bayonetta 3 who simply didn't work. And maybe if Bayonetta 3 had decent storytelling, Viola having a prequel game would have felt much more warranted, especially a prequel game that is in a completely different genre to the main game. I get from a branding perspective, Cereza is the better character to slap on the front because more people are going to go out and buy it. But it should have been a Viola game. The story works completely the same. Obviously, the only thing that changes is the Luca-On kind of connection, but maybe this Luca-On isn't her dad, or maybe she's just saving a different kid. Maybe there's an awareness that she's in another dimension. Like, it just doesn't have to be him, right? Like, we could adjust some of this Fairy King stuff to still have it be Luca-On, or maybe Luca-On is still the king. Like, maybe her dad is still alive and that's a problem. Just something. The narrative still works, is the main point. Cereza has sufficient backstory, so while I enjoy her as the lead in this, I think Viola needs the development so much more. Viola is connected to Cheshire. She uses Cheshire in Bayonetta 3. I understand that it's obviously Cereza's doll, and it has been throughout the franchise. We have an existing demon Cheshire who's attached to Viola, so make it about Viola. Viola being 15 and learning about magic is just so much more plausible. I think it's also so much more interesting to see Viola's connection to the fairies, because that's a part of her lineage. Like, maybe instead the boy she's trying to save is like her half-brother and she doesn't know it. And maybe because she's part fairy, she's the only one who can go into the forest and save Morgana's child. Maybe Morgana was teaching Viola magic and sword fighting. And it is also consistent with the Viola that we get in Bayonetta 3 because she's not the strongest magic user just yet. The character that Viola would have been in Origins, and then the character she would have been right after in Bayonetta 3, the link between those 2 characters is really logical to me. I also think instead of at the end, Cereza putting up her hair and muddying up the timeline of this game, because it's obviously connected to Bayonetta 3. The fact that she's wearing her hair in a ponytail makes it go into Bayonetta 1. Instead of that, maybe we have Viola finishing the game. She's just figured out magic and like demon control, and she can summon Cheshire whenever she needs him, and she picks up a sword and she goes on a journey to learn how to sword fight. And then that's Origins 2, is her figuring out combat. Viola also wields a sword that's imbued or somehow affiliated with fairy magic. So maybe part of the journey, and like maybe part of unsealing Luca-On or whatever his stand-in would be called, maybe a part of that is he's sealed by this specific sword, and that's the sword that she takes with her, and that's part of her building her strength. I'm sure since they're already doing alternate timeline stuff, and they're doing alternate timeline stuff with this game, like they could justify it. They could write around that. I'm confident that they could do it. I wouldn't be confident based on Bayonetta 3 alone, but based on the content that we got delivered in Miss Bayonetta Origins, they can write a story. Someone who works there is capable of doing that. We just needed a game exploring her backstory so much more than we needed Bayonetta's. Again, this game is great, but I think the treatment to the script that I'm proposing is better. Maybe not financially, but narratively, I think it would have been much more satisfying, especially because the journey is motivated by Cereza's mom, but like literally her mom could not be in this and no one would feel any differently. Like Rosa's not really a motivation. Cereza wants power more than she wants specifically to save her mother. Like, yeah, that's the end goal, but it's so abstract from where we are right now that it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. The last thing I want to talk about is the Kingdom Hearts of it all. Bayonetta is doing a Kingdom Hearts, and I can't stand it. Because Kingdom Hearts, as much as I love Kingdom Hearts, we have to agree that it's, to an extent, it's bad. Multiverse stuff, really hard to pull off. I think the only franchise, at least in recent memory, that I can think that does it well is the Nier Drakengard cycle. The Bayonetta franchise brought in the Multiverse of Madness, and it absolutely fucked everything up. Nothing is trackable, and now narratively, nothing even matters. Cereza in this game feels like she should be the origin story to Bayonetta 3's Bayonetta. It feels like that's the connection that they're making because that's the Bayonetta who survived in the multiverse. She's the Arch Eve, so she matters the most according to the narrative. And this game is even teased in Bayonetta 3. Like there's literally a playable segment in that game, and it came out like 4 months later. Like in my mind, these two titles should obviously be connected, but the fact that she ties her hair up in the end into a ponytail that is obviously reminiscent of Bayonetta 1 absolutely muddies the waters. Bayo 3 also introduces the fairies. It's obvious that Bayonetta 3 and Bayonetta Origins were supposed to be companion pieces, but they also don't want to commit to a timeline. They want to be able to do whatever they want, which I guess is fun for you, but it kind of frustrates me as an audience member because you could have something that's really good. Like this game works without hinging on the multiverse stuff. So why even bother? I don't know. I think it cheapens the product. It's so annoying to me that they're not connected, especially because like Luca, who the franchise is trying to like really force into this magical role now all of a sudden, even though I think he works best as a civilian, making him the fairy king and the fairy half-blood prince in this game and having him turn into like the wolf thing in Bayonetta 3. Like obviously it is all supposed to be directly connected to this game. It's just so frustrating to me. Like I don't like that they did that to Luca, and I don't like that they go so far to ensure that these two stories are connected, but they're not willing to commit to canon, I guess. Just thinking big picture, it's stupid. Jeanne has a secret playable chapter at the end of the game where she like takes Cheshire. This allegedly happens at some point in the main story. I feel like you can probably just like choose in your heart whenever you want it to be. And it's just a string of battles back to back. It only takes about an hour to do. And they're normal fights. But in the end, you fight a homunculi boss. And the homunculi are the enemy type from Bayonetta 3. And like I said, the internet told me that this fight was going to be really hard, and it really wasn't. It was kind of a breeze. In this fight, the homunculi even goes so far as to show Jeanne a vision of her future in which they do a watercolor rendition of herself in Bayonetta 3 getting stabbed by Sigurd or whatever the doctor's name is. See my video here of me bitching about Bayonetta 3. So he taunts Jeanne with this vision of her future. Jeanne kills him and affirms that she's going to try and circumvent this future. But if the games are so loosely connected anyways, and Viola isn't even remotely in the picture, and Jeanne and Bayonetta are relatively weak, like where's this plot thread going? Like I just don't get it. It feels like they're teasing something and they're not going to follow through on that promise. And if they do, they can make me eat my words. It's like that one Twitter meme going around right now that's like, there are no hot guys who like little tank tops, with that Sasha Colby meme, just so that people will respond in the threads with pictures of themselves being hot guys in little tank tops. There are no good Bayonetta games about Jeanne. Do you think it's working? The writers don't seem to really like Jeanne, and they seem really resistant to giving her a game, only shitty side content. So I guess we'll see. I think it's time for me to log off. So this has been my video for today. If you enjoyed this, if you've made it to the end, please subscribe. Like 70% of the people who watch my channel are not. And while I am not doing this to achieve any sort of success, this is just a fun hobby. It'd be really nice. I can't pretend that I don't want to be supported. Okay, that's all for me. Good night.